Annihilation was a crossover event from 2006 that involved Thanos and the Nova Corps, and even introduced us to Drax the Destroyer. Welcome to the Comicstorian Full Story channel, where we take old and new full stories from Comicstorian and put them here to give you a better viewing experience. If you enjoy the video, be sure to support the industry and go check it out at your local comic shop. This is the Marvel event known as Annihilation. I hope you enjoy.
It was a late night at Coots Bluff, Alaska, when an alien prisoner transport ship fell to Earth. The alien lunatic pulls himself out of the wreckage and he asks if anyone else is alive. From another part of the debris, two aliens known as the Blood Brothers crawl out, and Lunatic tells them to hurry up and follow him. The three begin running, and one of the brothers asks why are they even running, and Lunatic shouts that this is the worst planet to have crash landed on. As the group talks, the squirrel watching them begins to change, and it tells them that this place is called Earth in their common language. Lunatic says that it looks like that damn shape-shifting squirrel Pybok survived, and Pybok tells them that it's the shape-shifting ability that will get them off of this dust ball. Lunatic then asks if anyone else survived, and Pybok motions over to the Green Brute, who survived as well. A few moments later, one of the Blood Brothers is hit with a piece of the fallen ship, and Drax shouts, "No hit, Drax! No hit, Drax! Ever, ever, ever!" Lunatic shouts, what was the point of that? They're trying to reason with him, and then they suddenly start swinging at him? The other brother tells him, well, he should have just listened to them and come with them then. They wouldn't have had to hit him. Drax rubs his head, telling them, hard hit makes Drax's head feel funny. And Pybok tells him that he has his condolences. The other Blood Brother says that he's got to step up and show this guy some manners. Lunatic tells him that this guy isn't just anyone, he's the single most concentrated, destructive force in the universe. He's even been dead and back. Drax looks at Pybok and says, oh, you Green. Drax Green, you Drax's daddy? Pybok tells him that if that would simplify things, then yes. The other brother doesn't listen to Lunatic and charges down, knocking Drax down the hill. While Pybok and Lunatic watch the fight, Pybok mentions that when Drax was found, he was trying to drink the Singularity Drive plasma spill. He got a few good swallows in him before it caught up. The fumes alone should have killed him. And Lunatic then asks, what are you trying to say? Drax is tough? They already knew that. He was put together to take on Thanos himself. He goes on and he asks if they should break up the fight, and Pybok tells him no. Let them stay busy while they scout out the human habitat up ahead. Down the hill, the brothers continue beating into Drax, and Drax manages to catch one of them and toss him into the other. Drax then tells them to just go ahead and walk away. We'll call it clean. You do not want to push this any further. The brothers run back shouting that they won't, and Drax cracks them in the head, telling them to just knock it off! But up ahead, Pybok and Lunatic make their way towards the town when they spot two Earth children standing in their path. In his language, Lunatic asks if he should kill the pups, and Pybok tells him that it won't be necessary. He then speaks English to the boy, asking if their leader's around here, and the boy points to the girl Cammi. Pybok looks over and Cammi says that he's green, smells like a rendering truck, and his friend there doesn't even have a face. What could possibly go wrong? Pybok asks what's a rendering truck, and she tells him that they pick up roadkill. Back in the alien language, Pybok then says that he thinks that she just insulted him. Pybok turns to Cammi and says that she seems rather calm. He takes it that this isn't her first, what do you people call it? Close encounters? Cammi says that you really can't turn on the TV without seeing some kind of a freak show on the news. Kinda desensitizes you. But as for my friend Dex here, Dex just screams and stares and starts to run in the other direction. Back up on the hill, one of the brothers grabs and throws Drax, and the other brother says, that was a nice clean arc. While the two of them talk about how much better they are than each other, Drax slams back down. He folds his arm, telling them, you're the Blood Brothers, right? Muscle for hire? That would make you just above Swamp Shoot. One of the brothers says that it looks like they're beating the sense into him. Has he been getting smarter? Drax then tells them, pay close attention because I will not be repeating this. Walk away and you'll both live. One of the brothers says that they're a bit late for that, and as they both charge back in, they shout, blood for blood! Meanwhile, over in the forest, Pybok and Lunatic walk off, and Cammi shouts that at least the kid in the movie's got a flying bike. But just as she finishes, there's a large object thrown just before her. As she looks at it, Cammi says, oh joy, there's more of them. And Drax gets up from being thrown. When Drax looks at her, he sees Cammi and he asks, is that you, Heather? Did Thanos not kill you? While Drax struggles to try and remember things, the brothers walk up and find Drax sitting there, and he says, I don't want to fight anymore, my head hurts. And the brothers tell him, you know, we don't want to beat you too smart, let's go. Cammi asks what was that about, and Drax just looks at her asking, Heather? She says, you know, I'll bite. Who's Heather? Drax says that he's sorry. Daddy should have been there. And Cammi tells him, "You know what? Daddy, those bad men hurt me!" And she begins stomping on the ground, shouting, "They hurt Heather!" And he begins stomping on the ground, shouting, "They hurt Heather!" Heather follows and watches as Drax begins to run in, fighting the brothers by throwing them off of a cliff, screaming, "No one hurts Heather!" The fighting ends up knocking the brothers into the town where Paibok and Lunatic went to, and Paibok asks one of the brothers if he cares to explain what's going on. The brother fighting calls back that the more they hit him, the more savvy he gets. Paibok then tells one of the humans to go on ahead and work on their plans. Do not make him come looking for him. He will finish this here and now. While Drax continues to fight one of the brothers, he pushes them back, telling them, "Not smart taking it to my family." And then a familiar voice tells him, "Oh, someone's looking a bit eloquent." Drax turns back to see Paibok, now looking like Thanos, and while stunned, Paibok changes back and thrusts a spike into Drax's forehead. As his body falls to the ground, Cammi watches, saying, "Whoa, cool!" Once the fighting stops, Cammi runs over, pointing to Drax's body, asking, "Who's in charge of that?" Paibok walks up, stating that it seems they meet again. But shouldn't she be in school or something? Cammi tells him no, but Paibok waves his arm, telling her to go run along before you become tiresome. Cammi turns back to one of the brothers and tells him, "You heard it. Paibok gave me Drax." One of the brothers calls back to Paibok, and he tells them, "Just deal with it." And so the brothers pick up the body, and they begin to follow Cammi back into the woods. They get up towards a cliff, and the brother throws Drax's body off, and she shouts, "Hey!" Dex says that he's pretty sure he doesn't care, and Cammi sighs, telling him, "Come on." The two make their way down the cliff, and Dex asks Cammi, why does she even want to keep this thing anyway? And Cammi tells him because he's special. God knows that she could have used something like that in her life for once. Dex tells her that he thought that she was special, and Cammi hangs her head, stating, "Shows how much you know." Once they reach the bottom, they find Drax's body smoldering, so they wait and watch. With the sun setting, Dex says that he's got to go home for dinner, and Cammi continues to sit and wait. Now with it being nighttime, Cammi finally sees something happening to Drax. The back begins to crack, and a fist punches out, and soon the rest of his body pulls itself out of his body. What Cammi sees is a now smaller Drax standing there. He looks at Drax and he tells her, "I sensed your presence. You are not Heather." Cammi says, "Ha, surprise! By the way, why are you smaller?" "I am once again restored as the Destroyer. You will need to be my eyes." As Cammi tries to ask what does he mean, she begins to see visions of Drax's past, including his daughter, Moondragon. She shouts, "What did you just do? Who the hell is Moondragon and Kronos? What's a Thanos?" Drax calmly tells her, "Moondragon is Heather, who is my daughter. Kronos is the one who betrayed me and stole my memories. And Thanos is my destiny. I am Arthur Douglas. I am Drax. I am the Destroyer returned." But as Drax holds his hand out and then pulls it back, he says, "Perhaps not fully restored." He begins to walk off, and Cammi follows, and he asks, "Why is it that you walk with me?" And she tells him that she's got some bad news for the Destroyer. She owns him. Therefore, she's in his life now. But first things first, they need to get him some clothes, maybe some biker leather. Drax asks, "What manner of girl are you?" And Cammi tells him that he should know. He was in her head. So after getting some pants and equipment, Dex notices Drax and Cammi coming out of the store. But shortly after Drax walked off leaving her, Dex runs up asking who was that? Was he a superhero or something? And Cammi tells him that she's really not in the mood for him. Cammi says that they have to go to school, but Dex stops mentioning that that's where the big bear guys went. She tells him that she's going to pretend that she did not just hear him refer to the aliens as... And Dex asks, why are they going to the school anyway? And Cammi says because sooner or later, he'll be going there. A short while later at the crash site, Lunatic looks through the debris trying to salvage as much as he can, but as he gets frustrated with nothing to pull, he tells the Blood Brothers to go ahead and just take the humans back. As the rain pours down, he says that he can't go anywhere, but from atop the wreckage, Drax appears. Lunatic looks back at the scrap and then suddenly feels a rush of wind, and seconds later his head falls off. Drax picks up his head, telling Lunatic, "I know your kind is notoriously hard to kill. The body just shuffles around and places the head right back on, right? Well then, we're just gonna have to take care of that body. Don't forget to tell Mephisto that Drax sent you there." And he tosses the head. Up ahead, the brothers hear a scream from Lunatic and they run back, but what they see stops them where they're standing. They stare at the suspended and tied up and headless body of Lunatic. One of the brothers asks if he's seeing what he's seeing, and the other one tells him seeing it and wishing he wasn't. While looking, there's a small movement from the headless body, and Drax bursts out, knocking both of the brothers to the ground. One of the brothers gets back up and fights back, slowly beating Drax to the ground. While choking him, the brother says that he'll give it to him. Only 2 people have managed to cut them and live to tell about it, and Drax smiles, telling them 3. The other brother calls out asking what's wrong, and the one on Drax falls over with 2 knives stuck in his head. Drax pulls his knives out, and the living brother tells him he's dead. He's dead! And Drax tells him, I think not. Paibok's voice says that he can see what the pup meant by not being fully restored. And as she put it, no energy stuff. Paibok then says that since she came to the school and he found her, she reeks of him on her. They bonded, which now means she's tainted goods. As the two talk though, the remaining brother screams that he will kill him, and Paibok punches him, saying that that is enough from him. He then pulls out a small device and presses the button. Cammi asks, shouldn't he be like taking away that doohickey that he just pressed? And Drax says, no, it's a folded distress beacon. He just turned himself in. As Paibok sits in a log, Drax says that now they just wait. And Cammi asks, you're not gonna clean this clock? Drax asks, what purpose would that serve? And she says he did capture her. It would make her feel better. Paibok laughs, saying it's like they're made for each other. Next morning, with no signs of the aliens, the townspeople begin to gather all of the bodies of the aliens killed, and they begin to hear the sounds of helicopters coming in. One man asks what they should do, and another says that it doesn't matter. Their problem is now S.H.I.E.L.D. helicopters as they pass over their heads. But as for Drax, he finds himself back on a prison transport ship, now with Cammi by his side. We are 7 days before Annihilation Day at the edge of the universe with Thanos. He looks over the cosmos laid out in front of him, pondering his next plan, when a young child approaches him. So you've arrived, Mistress Death. I'm here to bear witness. I feel it. Of course you do. Something comes. Yes, something wonderful. Death. I'm with him. Yes. And? Learn from this one, Thanos. This one knows me intimately. And with that, Mistress Death vanished, leaving Thanos there to think about this. Something wonderful. And this, on Annihilation Day, it all began. Over in the Crunch Energy Cascade on the Kylan moons, the end of the universe began as they came and they attacked in full stride. Giant bug-like creatures swarming into the area, devouring and destroying everything that they could. 7 days after the initial wave struck, destroying the outermost limits of known space. On the planet of Xandar, home of the Nova Corps, Richard Rider just arrived back at base, ready to be debriefed and take a little R&R. But the station was suddenly placed into lockdown. Elsewhere, on the floating space station, Drax the Destroyer is moving throughout it with a little girl named Cammi at his side. The Worldmind has detected the approaching presence of the Annihilation wave and has sent up a fleet to destroy it or steer it away from the star systems under the Nova Corps' jurisdiction. Drax sees the Nova Corps preparing for a large fight and he tells Cammi, "We're leaving." And he grabs her by the shirt and he breaks through the droid guarding them and he makes for the escape route. That's when the Nova Corps realizes their mistake as the wave smashes through them, destroying the fleet piece by piece. Alarms sound across the entire base as the rest of the Nova Corps is called in as the perimeter is broken. Explosions go off in space looking like beautiful fireworks, but they are in fact signaling the death of thousands of brave Nova Corps members. Under the horrific sight, Drax runs to an escape pod where he throws Cammi in and he hits the button. They launch into space and they watch as the wave is blasting and crushing the souls of an entire corps of peacekeepers. As they fall to Xandar, they see the station that they were just on being devoured. Meanwhile, down on the planet, Richard and the Corps are holding back the wave to the best of their ability, but the entire wave has sliced through the fleet like they were nothing, and they are now focused on devouring the entire planet. Giant pods land as the shields are broken, and the insects begin to crawl on the surface of the planet, firing lasers, taking out each and every Corps member in their path. The bravest souls in the galaxy begin to panic as their weapons aren't working until they're split from ear to ear. Richard realizes that there is no stopping this. They are mindless drones willing to kill themselves to eat one Corpsman. As Richard turns to the squad with them, telling them to follow him, they decide that they need random patterns to throw off the drones, and it appears to be working until Richard and his friend Samaya see a blazing fireball falling from the skies. Richard looks up asking, "What is that?" And Samaya tells him that it's the spaceport. It's burning and falling to the planet. They both realize that they can't get around it. This is the end. They are going to die. But Richard tells her they have one chance. They're going through the middle. He grabs her and he rockets straight into the fireball. A suicide attempt at saving them seems to be paying off, and Samaya turns to him. "I would like to point out that if you pull this off, I'm going to mate with you for life." Then she smiles at him, and as he looks back, a piece of the ship clips Samaya. She falls, and the blood is splattered onto Richard's face. At that moment, a beam hits him as well, and with the fire and wreckage burning around him, Richard is pinned into the wreckage of the spaceport as it hits the ground with the force of a planet. Then through the darkness, Richard pushes the beam aside, and he crawls out of the wreckage, hoping beyond hope that it's over. He climbs to the top of it to see around him. All of Xandar's destroyed. He pulls off his helmet and he falls to his knees with tears mixing in with his own blood. And then he puts his face into his hands. I was there. I'm the last of the Nova Corps, and I was there the day that they fell. The next day, with the snow falling around him, Richard woke up to a voice in his head calling out to him, and him responding with a question. If I'm the only Nova alive, who's talking to me? I am the Xandarian Worldmind, and as the last Nova, I need you to get me off of this planet. I need your help, Richard Rider. At the present state of decay, I will suffer system death in less than 2 hours, and at that time the entire collective database of the Xandarian culture will be lost. So everyone's dead and you're telling me that I can still save the supercomputer? Yes. Unbelievable, your priorities. Nova Corps Priority 1, defend the Xandarian civilization. Priority 2, protect and maintain the Xandarian world mind. Well, you can shove it. Richard, this is important. Shut up. It is critical. It is critical that you shut up. Richard walks until he sees the remains of the wave, and he sees them eating the dead. So he leaps into the air, telling the world mind that he's about to engage in a little Terran-based emotional response called payback. But he's so weak that they throw him aside. The bugs jump on him to begin devouring him as well. So the world mind engages Richard's flight functions and takes over his suit, bringing him to the world mind itself. He arrives and he removes his helmet, staring at the collective consciousness of Xandar. And he asks, all right, I'll bite. What's next? And the world mind explains, I'm going to download myself into your head, Richard. Richard argues that, no one person can hold that power. Each Nova Corps member has a small fraction of that power and it turns us into rockets. But the world mind insists. So Richard reminds it that Garthan Saul, the guy who did this, it drove him insane. And the world mind tells him, well, you are correct. This situation is different. You'll be carrying the consciousness of the world mind and I will assist you. Plus, I will adjust your suit to carry this burden. Lastly, you will only be carrying me to my next location, so it won't hurt you too much. Richard puts his helmet back on, and he lets the world mind download itself into him. Richard then feels it. He feels the power. It's so much that the Nova Corps force is literally rolling out of him and onto the ground. So he tells the world mind, get your coat, we're leaving. And then with a horrific grin on his face, he rockets through space, aiming at the bugs still floating over Xandar. The world mind tells him, we have to leave. But Richard rockets right into the main ship, losing control, taking it out and exploding on himself. He wakes up back on the planet's surface with the world mind telling him, that was dumb, Richard. And Richard asking him, why didn't I die as well? Why did I survive? And with that, Drax and Cammi arrive to find him sitting there. They introduce themselves and Drax explains that they need to find a way off of this rock. Richard turns his back on them, telling them that he is a danger to be around. They need to leave. He's too dangerous to be around like this. And Drax counters with a rather good point. You aren't more dangerous than whatever that is. Point, but still. Drax tries to convince him, and Richard turns his head away from Drax and Cammi to talk to the world mind. Drax finds the fact that Richard is talking to himself a bit odd, but he figures out that he's obviously talking to the master control system. The world mind brings up something, telling Richard that he can't help Drax. He must be Drax the Destroyer, wanted in multiple space systems for the mass destruction of everything, and a man who was out to kill Thanos. Richard turns to him, Drax, any relation to the Destroyer? And Drax simply tells him, no, that's some other guy. And Cammi helps. Taller guy, much taller. So no history of destroying in your past. And if there was, just ask him. Come on, follow me. So the last remaining Nova, the Destroyer bent on killing Thanos and a little girl, begin to traverse the destroyed world of Xandar in the snow. And they make their way to the destroyed capital, looking for a way off-world. And why doesn't Richard just fly everyone off as the strongest Nova ever, you ask? Well, he's afraid of losing control again, so it may be safer for everyone to board a ship and fly off the planet together. As they enter what remains of the ground spaceport, though, they quickly come up on some of the remaining ground wave troops, and Drax leaps in with his knives, telling Richard to get Cammi out of here. Richard and Cammi run through the tunnels, but Drax isn't enough to stop all of the bugs, and they chase after the two Earthlings, and Richard is afraid of using his power. They get boxed in until Drax runs up behind them, demanding to know why you didn't blast them, Nova. Nova doesn't give him an answer, so Drax persists, demanding to know what's going on. Richard hands him the helmet, so Drax slips it on. Hello? No, this is Drax. Because I'm wearing his hat. Because he gave it to me. And then he begins to walk off, talking to the world mind. No, really, I'm not that Drax. No, I never lie. With whom am I speaking? Richard sits with Cammi, explaining how he was given his powers and how he is now the last of the Novas, a galaxy-wide peacekeeping force. And Drax comes back over, handing Richard his helmet. The world mind explained your situation, so I'm going to show you how to focus that rage and power into something useful. You can do that? I have destroyed a lot in my time. It takes a lot of focus and self-control. But you're not a destroyer per se. Perish the thought. So the trio heads off to the last ship that they're able to find and they load up. Except that the Nova ships require the Nova Force to power them up. They lift off of the planet and they begin to head over to the Stargate, and as they get to the outer reaches of space, they see it. And Drax tells Richard to focus his Nova energies and open that gate. Richard tells him that he's scared, but Drax tells him, just start. So Richard begins to let the Nova Force overflow out of him, and their spikes of power are beginning to spark all over the place, and he turns to Drax. I'm losing control, Drax. What do I do? You don't lose control. And what if I do? Then I kill you. This is how you're gonna help me? Yeah. Is it working? And at a giant whoosh, the ship departs through the Stargate. But the damage was so massive that as they approach the next planet, the ship begins to crash into it until they're stopped. In front of the ship, holding it steady, is Quasar. Richard looks at him surprised to see his friend, and Cammi says what we're all thinking. You know, I didn't think it was possible, but he's even cornier looking than you, Nova. So he brings them down to the surface where he welcomes them to the planet. It's currently being evacuated from the Annihilation wave on its way. And Quasar is ensuring that the fleeing inhabitants don't crash into each other or cause other issues. Nova explains how bad the situation is with the loss of Xandar and the entire Nova Corps. And Quasar asks the big question. Should we signal the Avengers or the Imperial Guard? Drax tells him the truth though. Signal the Skrulls for all I care. The universe hasn't seen something like this in a billion years. There's nothing that we can do to survive it. He then spills the beans that Richard is holding back something. He has the Worldmind inside of him and in the entirety of the Nova Force. He then tells them, we need to get ready for a fight. And Nova needs to stop being in denial of his power. But none of this matters as the Annihilation wave approaches fast, and Quasar tells him, if you have the entirety of the Nova Force inside of you, then you're gonna have to use it to save these people. You can use the powers that you have to open up the Stargate so that it can hold everyone and they can all leave. That's when they hear the alarms and the heroes get ready. Drax sits with his gun prepared to protect Cammi, and Quasar lifts off into space. He calls out, Nova, are you coming, Nova? Richard stands there looking at Drax. I know. Get my head in the game or die. And the Worldmind calls out to him, but it's too late. Richard Rider is rocketing into space to what could be his death. And the beauty of space, Quasar is firing his beams at anything that moves as Nova arrives blasting through the ships. Nova asks what he should do and Quasar tells him, charge up the Stargate. I'll hold back these advanced units. Richard flies over to it, charging up the gravimetric power until it converges on him, and even the Worldmind offers to help control it. Together, they cause a massive spike in power directed at the Stargate, and everyone that is trying to flee the planet is able to go through at once. But that amount of power being spiked out did something else. It alerted Annihilus to the great power nearby, and Annihilus is the leader of the Annihilation wave. As everyone is leaving one at a time, Nova flies back over to Quasar asking what they should do next, and he tells him that they need to stall long enough for everyone to escape. But at that moment, the situation gets worse as the wave commits suicide, crashing their ships into Nova and Quasar. As they both recover, Richard decides that it's time to take this into a full frontal assault. Quasar calls out to him to stop, but Richard isn't stopping. He has what, 10 minutes to stall? Why not make it the bravest 10 minutes, the best 10 minutes, the most epic 10 minutes of Richard Rider's life? He begins opening fire with the full power of the Nova Force, dropping ships everywhere as he sees them, and then he rockets as the human rocket through them. Most of the time, he curls back on himself, finishing off the ships with more Nova blasts. But it's still too much for him. Even with the whole Nova Force at his disposal, Richard can't do it. He's getting bombarded. But guess what? Quasar isn't a pushover either. This is the guy with the Quasar bands, and his power is immense. He follows up, taking out the ship that was bombarding Richard, and he asks him, are you insane? And Richard tells him, no, but we gotta stall, and that's all that matters. Live or die, those refugees are depending on us. Can we do it, Quasar? Now you ask me? Of course we can. Have you seen us? I have the quantum bands and you have the Nova Force. We can make this the hardest 10 minutes they've ever known. As the two of them get ready to end their lives with this assault, Drax calls up telling them, Annihilus is here, guys, the leader of the wave. Nova asks who that is, and Drax tells him, well, I don't have time to give you the resume, but just trust me, he didn't get his name for quilting souls. You guys need to get a headshot. Remove the head of the wave. Squish the king bug. Why don't you come up here and try it out with us? I would if I could fly. Maybe some will land. I got those. Then Drax loses a signal and it's up to Nova and Quasar. Seeing the capital ship, they decide to take Drax's advice and they charge right for the cockpit of it. As they approach with fires burning around them, Nova tells Quasar, all right, let's land and let me do the talking. But he quickly rethinks that. Never mind, just smoke him! As they crash through the glass. Richard gets ready to blast him and Annihilus swats him away into Quasar, throwing them both back into the corner of the throne room. Quasar gets up and he sees Richard unconscious, so he holds up the quantum bands, charging up his power, ready to blast Annihilus. Except Annihilus reaches through the charging power. Give me your power! I wish to feast on it! Quasar realizes that this isn't right. This isn't normal. Give you my power? What are you talking about? Annihilus grabs the bands, holding them up, sucking them dry. What are you doing? I won't let you take my power! You don't get to choose! And with that, in one move, Annihilus disintegrates Quasar. The Bug King then turns to where Nova lie, ready to take the Nova Force, but then he sees Richard is missing, and Richard uppercuts him with the full power of a man with nothing left. He begins to bombard Annihilus, and the Worldmind taps in once again. Attention, Richard. It is critical that we flee. You cannot win this. He outclasses you in every way. I know! He will take the Nova Force. I know! This will result in your death. This will result in my death. Therefore, it's critical that we withdraw from combat. Shut up and look in my head! Look at what I'm thinking! Ah. Right, just get ready to try that. Annihilus reaches out, grabbing Richard, and as the Nova Force begins to get sucked out of him, he begins to feel his life force draining. The Worldmind enacts the plan, and he redirects the entire Annihilation wave onto itself using Annihilus' psychic link. Annihilus lets go of him, trying to figure out what just happened, and Richard sees that Annihilus is finally confused. I have him on the ropes. Let's finish him, Worldmind. No, Richard, you can't. All right. You might be right this time. And he uses the full power that he has left at his disposal to withdraw as fast as he can, until he passes out in space. Drax and Cammi find Richard floating out there and they pick him up. As Richard explained what happened, Drax told him that Annihilus did withdraw, but he will be back with far more bugs ready to finish what he started. They've only given themselves time to prepare. So Richard asks Drax, "Can you teach me to destroy?" Now with Annihilation Day long past and Annihilus pushed back, Nova has had time to build up a resistance to the wave. And while his battle with Annihilus did not win the war, it did delay everyone enough for him to make a united front. And at his side to help him organize the ordeal, Peter Quill. He used to be known as the Star-Lord, but circumstances have changed, making it so that he didn't want to go by that name anymore. Richard Rider, the hero that gave the universe a chance to prepare, has taken the role of Commander-in-Chief, and as they look across the battlefield laid out in front of them, Peter explains to Richard that this is their last stand, and he'd prefer that they fall back to the secondary perimeter. Richard asks if Gamora agrees, and Peter tells him that she is off on a black op. There's no word right now. The wall next to them is suddenly overtaken by the Bug Army assaulting the walls, and Peter begins spouting off which perimeters they just lost. Richard runs into the battle yelling for him to tell him what's happening in English, and Peter tells him, the force fields are gonna drop. Then they lose the right flank to the onslaught. Luckily, there is the Kree, and Ronin the Conqueror. He has been in his own conflict where he is currently on trial for his actions and had his title stripped. As he tore through the bug bodies, he saw that it was a lost cause and he called for everyone to retreat. While this was happening up in space, the former heralds of Galactus are battling it out with the bugs in the air. It's Firelord, Redshift, and Stardust, and they fight not to rescue the galaxy, but for themselves, as Annihilus has ordered their capture for an unknown reason. As Peter pulls the survivors with them to the deeper reaches of the base, Richard Rider throws his helmet on, activating his Nova powers. I can't lead from the rear, Peter. Get them to safety. And he launches into the battle to hold back the bug scum. During this portion of the conflict, the Kree have grabbed Cammi and they make a break for it while Drax destroys everything in front of him. Cammi is the little girl that Drax met on the planet Earth before being picked up and joining into this fight. She's been tagging along. And Drax, well, he's the Destroyer after all, and he's about to get buried in bugs. And Richard blasts by burying them. Took you long enough. You're welcome. The force fields are down. Tell me something I don't know. Richard grabs Drax's hand and they blast up into the sky, soaring over the battlefield, and Drax tells him, you know what you have to do. This base is lost. Richard drops Drax before pondering it for only a second, and then he calls in the bombardment. The entire base is destroyed, and anyone who is too slow to leave loses their lives. Up in space, Firelord breaks down the hull of a spaceship and he walks inside, blasting his powers cosmic at anything that moves until he walks into the main chamber. Queen, order your forces to stand down. You are defeated. I am? And what of you? You reek of death and you will expire soon. The Firelord raises his power up, and his eyes begin to blaze with that fire inside. Ladies first. With the loss of the Queen, the attack wave on the base fell apart, and the Resistance didn't lose that day. Sensing the loss of a Queen, Annihilus contacts someone that he has brought in to help gain the cosmic powers, Thanos. Thanos tells him, you need the cosmic power, because you asked me for a way to extract the cosmic power. So how about you stop distracting me? Annihilus kills the comms and turns to his second in command, Ravenous. How can we deal with these heralds, as they vex me so? The Ravenous brings up a rather good point. They know you want them alive. You've removed the threat of death from them. So Annihilus tells him, fine, exterminate them! Meanwhile, back with Richard, he begins to put his suit back on and he looks at his bedmate. Go back to sleep. Gamora looks at him with nothing but a sheet covering her naked body. That in order? Is there something wrong? I've been thinking. You've been hanging around with Peter too much. You're developing a sense of humor. Bite your tongue. He gets up to leave her there and he looks for Peter, where they begin to go over how screwed they are. He explains the major problems. The Heralds are involved, but the Shi'Ar are holding back and the Badoon have hunkered down, not wanting to be involved in this. While they go over how they really don't have anyone to stand with them, Cammi sees Drax sharpening his knife. You're only doing this to get to him, aren't you? Thanos. And Drax smirks. Clever girl. Peter and Richard walk into the holding chambers where they have the queen that Firelord defeated prisoner, and they demand to know what's going on. She tells them, pray for death, because we have the devourer of worlds, Galactus, and the Silver Surfer. Because while you fought us here, elsewhere Annihilus won his fight. Galactus isn't the only cosmic entity out there. No, Thanos informed Annihilus of the others, Aegis and Tenebros. Using them, we've defeated a Galactus and his herald, and we've imprisoned their power. And then she warns them. Annihilus has all, be it a mad titan or an elder god. They are all working for Annihilus. This war has ended. The next day, Drax is occupied preparing for his battle when out of nowhere, Phyla arrives telling him that he's a hard man to find. Thanos has his daughter. Phyla and Moondragon went to the graves on Titan to pay their respects when Thanos arrived. He blasted Phyla and he tore Moondragon's ear from her head before taking her prisoner. He threw the ear to Phyla to show as a warning to Drax. If Drax approaches and does anything to Thanos, he'll kill his daughter. But Drax tells him, it is my destiny to kill Thanos. And Phyla argues, it's your daughter! Drax walks off and Cammi asks Phyla if she can keep the ear. Meanwhile, the Kree armies are refusing to all team up with Richard. If one sides with him, none of the others will. Ronin, the former accuser, has had enough and he blasts the leaders of the Furio house, making him their new commander. While this is happening, Praxagora delivers the body of the Super Skrull after his fight to the Resistance. She explains that in order to rescue her, the Super Skrull absorbed the heat that she was generating to save her life. And at that moment, Ravenous and his troops all teleport in. Richard readies to fight and he asks Peter, who are these guys? Oh, the usual. Terrax, Pybok, a giant mad thinker robot. Peter, it's not good, Richard. Gamora tells everyone that she senses the energy. Thanos is who teleported them in, and Ravenous tells his troops, kill them. Meanwhile, up at Annihilus' ship, we see that Thanos has discovered a way to harness the power cosmic, as both Galactus and the Silver Surfer are contained in his super weapon. Ravenous calls out for Pybok to get the snipers, Terrax to kill Gamora, and the Nova is mine. Peter then whines that he's not even on Ravenous' radar, and as Ronin swings his hammer at Ravenous and the bolts fly by, Peter takes cover. Everyone begins their battles with Drax running along the broken wall, leaping in to fight the ground troops. After a quick slice opens up a trooper in front of him, he's suddenly hit in the face with thousands of tiny insects and he calls out, "This thing is infested!" But before they can even deal with that, another portal opens up and out jumps Annihilus' elite, the Centaurians. While this is happening, the bug that Drax is on begins running into a cave while he stabs it over and over and over, trying to kill it. It falls to the ground still squirming, so Drax continues to stab it over and over until something blasts him off of it. It begins to fly down after him, so he gets up, leaping into the air to attack it, and he brings it down to the ground. Meanwhile, Praxagora is trying to get the Super Skrull's body out of the fight, and the former Heralds of Galactus arrive, burning the entire battlefield with no discretion. While Ravenous continues to battle with Ronin, he asks him, "The Kree cast you out and you still defend them?" And he simply replies, "To my dying breath." But while they've slightly held their ground, the Annihilation wave has been moving closer and closer to them, until it is now far too late. As the primary wave broke down the doors to their haven, outside they begin to see the thousands upon thousands of bugs coming to attack. While this is happening, Phyla and Peter decide to get the heck out of Dodge, as Nova tells them to evacuate as many as they can and stay alive. Up in Annihilus' command ship, he lands blasting off as much power as he can, and he walks into the central chamber, where Thanos is waiting. Thanos is already messing with the devices attached to Galactus, and Annihilus gives the order. "Destroy the planet! Let Galactus feed and we will take their power!" Back on the planet, Ravenous buries Ronin into a wall, and then he grabs him by the throat, prepared to finish off the former accuser, until Firelord shows up. His death will be the stuff of legends, and yours, Ravenous? What say we find out? Ravenous turns to him and smiles. "Oh yes, let's do that." The explosion is massive, and even Richard turns around asking, "What's going on now?" And Peter tells him, "This keeps getting better and better. I say it's time to call it a day." Richard then turns to him, "Horrible news though. We have nowhere to fall back to, Peter." And it's Drax that clarifies. He doesn't mean retreat. He means get off world. This planet is lost. Our heroes all begin to run into the depths of the base looking for a method of escape, while Drax begins to ask, "Who's gonna stay and fight to the end?" Peter tells him that it's only gonna be volunteers. This is death. While they try to figure out what's going on, Drax notices that the android is even leaving the planet, which isn't a good sign. Over with Gamora, she's winning her fight, but one of the former heralds swoops in grabbing her, telling her it is time to go. She tries to argue, but the herald tells her Galactus is here. As everyone is preparing to board the escape vessels, the rubble is thrown aside and the Super Skrull stands up, not dead, but alive, holding the unconscious bodies of Firelord and Ronin, asking the question, why was I buried under the rubble? Everyone loads up into the escape ships and Cammi runs in asking for Drax, but Peter holds her back as the door shuts behind her. Drax is still out there, stop the launch! And Peter tells her, his choice girl, strap in. As she screamed for Drax jumped back in to fight the bugs. This was the moment that the power of Galactus was to be used, and he blasted the entire planet as the remaining forces from Annihilus were teleported off-world. And Drax was buried under the force of the power cosmic. Or did he? Because instead, this is all a part of Drax's plan. He ran to his own escape ship and he blasted off into space because Thanos is his destiny. Inside of the command ship, Annihilus demands that Thanos give him the power cosmic, and Thanos insists that he feeds something to Galactus, otherwise Galactus is going to die, and they won't have his power. He then walked off. Meanwhile, our heroes made their way to the Sol system where they overlook Earth. Richard tells Peter that they have to stop Annihilus, otherwise this world is lost, and Peter mentions, you know, the heroes down there can stop Annihilus and Thanos. And Richard tells him, have you not been monitoring the transmissions? The superheroes are in a civil war. A house divided cannot stand. We had a united front and look where that got us. They are in warring factions down there. They're no use to us. I just as soon bring in the Badoons, as if they've forgotten how to be heroes. I'm gonna go end this, Peter. Peter turns to leave. I'll get my things then. Huh? If you think that I'm gonna let you run off and get yourself killed without me being there to tell you I told you so, you're crazy, Richard. Richard Rider smiles. Never crossed my mind, Peter. Over in Annihilus' command ship, Drax has landed and he's tearing the bugs apart as he makes his way through it. He eventually murders another queen, causing her forces to fall in disarray, and then he smiles. This'll work. This means some very bad things for Thanos. Back with Moondragon and Thanos, he continues to taunt her and she decides to peek into his mind, and what she sees terrifies her. There's a failsafe built into Galactus. Only Thanos can turn off the Galactus super weapon, which is a problem because, as Moondragon explains, when she peeked into Annihilus' head, his plan is to do nothing more than absorb all of the planets eating that power, because he wants Galactus to become a cosmic bomb and wipe all life in the galaxy out. After another fight to regain control of her own body, Moondragon falls again, and Thanos at least agrees with Moondragon, and he heads over to turn off the Galactus bomb. But don't worry, her daddy is here to end this, as Drax pries open some doors and burns through the bugs in front of him. Once he finally finds Thanos and Moondragon, he jumps in full of spit and vinegar, overflowing with power. Moondragon tries to tell Drax to stop yelling at him to let Thanos finish, only he can stop Annihilus, and Drax in response throws his knife at his own daughter, letting the hilt hit her on the head and knock her out. He then charges at Thanos as Thanos tells him, give me a damned moment, Destroyer, I must finish this. Drax cares not as he dives in with both of his knives. Thanos throws him aside and then he looks at the hole that he created, and he sees Mistress Death. When he looks down, he sees that Drax punched a hole in his chest, removing his heart. Staring at it, Thanos can only say, interesting. Moondragon wakes up asking Drax what did he do, and he tells her, I did what I was created to do. And she tells him, he doomed them all. She tries to explain what he did, and Drax tells her that Galactus is not his concern. He did what he was created to do, destroy Thanos. And then he asks what Thanos' plans were. She tells him that he had a modified power array that he was going to use to free the Devourer. So Drax tells her, I got this. She tries to argue that Thanos had ultimate power, so Drax jumps down into the power array of Galactus. He looks up at the Devourer and he tells him, I'm gonna free you, Devourer. Make sure my daughter is delivered safely. He then tears off the couplings and pulls a body out of the power array, and that's when we see the Silver Surfer. Drax drags the unconscious body over to the power array, and then using the power cosmic, he begins the shutdown process, which wakes up the Surfer, who then puts both of his hands into the array, overflowing it with power. He then collapses, telling Drax, it is done. A giant purple hand begins to reach up, and then we begin to hear the bellowing voice of a cosmic entity, one known as Galactus. Know me, Annihilus. Know me and no fear. And then he begins to burn through Annihilus' ship. Meanwhile, over on the Kree homeworld, Ronin has teamed up with the Super Skrull to retake Hala and clear his name. And that's when we see the Centurions, Annihilus' lapdogs. Ronin knows that this can only mean that the House Firo has sold the Kree Empire to the enemy, and he kicks in their front door. Standing there waiting for him is Ravenous, who's brokering the deal. The Super Skrull lands by his side on fire, and he begins to tangle with Ravenous. But using this as an opportunity, Ronin approaches Ravenous. Know that you have been judged, and you have been found guilty! And he smashes Ravenous' head with his hammer. He then takes control, leaving the accusers to handle the house. He walks into the Supreme Intelligence's chamber, telling him, "You deserved better than this, and you will be remembered." As he breaks the tank holding the giant head, he walks out to a crowd cheering his name as he has liberated the Kree Empire. But honestly, that's a story that we've barely touched on, and it's time to tell you how all of this ends and begins. The giant purple hand reaches up with the surfer riding in front of him, and the surfer says it, "No more." As the ship begins to fall apart, Drax yells out, "You gave your word! You said that you would bring her to safety!" But before he can even finish his words, they've been teleported far off-world. Annihilus jumps up demanding to know, "What happened? The power cosmic was mine!" And Galactus tells his herald, "Go forth. Herald my rage!" He begins to burn everything around him as the Silver Surfer takes point, and Annihilus watches as a giant flaming ball of rage comes at him, demanding to know how his whole plan was undone by the Mad Titan. But as it fades, Annihilus stands on a torn rock, declaring that he has survived. Annihilus lives! He looks over to see Galactus walking away, thinking that his job is done, and then he holds up his hands, charging up his power. Annihilus is patient! Annihilus will win, Devourer! And then he hears a voice behind him. No, it ends here. And there stands Richard Rider with Peter Quill and Pyra. One way or another, I'm gonna end you, Annihilus. Annihilus looks at Richard and he sees him using the Nova Force to protect his friends. The Nova thing survived to Galactus as well! Only one of us walks away, Annihilus. Agreed. And with that, they rocket at each other in a massive explosion. They become entangled with punches and kicks. Annihilus throws Richard into a rock nearby and he drives home his point as he digs into Richard's chest. He then smacks Richard down again. Pyra sees the problem. Annihilus still has the quantum bands. So she pushes against the shield that Nova left her in until it breaks. And as Annihilus stands over Richard, ready to end it, she hits him in the back. He blasts her out of the way, and she reaches out. And with that, the quantum bands leave Annihilus's body, and they go to her. As she tells him, the bands don't like to stay on evil, and I gave them an alternative. She returns to the bands, ready to kill him, but Annihilus blasts her back. And then he turns to Richard. Annihilus will keep coming until he eats you! And Richard charges at him. You keep saying that, but I think the quantum bands were fueling you. Surviving Galactus drained you, and your flapping jaw is your weakness in your armor. He literally reaches down into Annihilus's throat and grabs whatever he can, tearing out his bug organs. This is for the Nova Corps! With that, he collapses. Off in the distance is Thanos and Mistress Death looking down on the defeat of Annihilus. And thus, the Annihilation wave has been ended. Richard survived and he began to heal up with Peter by his side. Galactus went back to work, supposedly hungrier than ever. The former heralds were all KIA or MIA, and Firelord went off to get revenge on the surviving Centurions. Drax, Super Skrull, and Praxagon all went missing, and Moondragon refused to give any information as to where they went. No one has even seen Cammi since she escaped to that planet. And Ravenous? After all of his negotiations with the Kree people, he took what he had and he went to the remaining Annihilation wave, and he held up an egg to the bugs to announce Annihilus is born again.
And there you have it, the Annihilation event from 2006 over at Marvel. What did you guys think of this story? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe to the channel. We will see you next time. Rest in peace, Benny.